Okay, hello again. So we're going to move on to stage 3 of this process of deploying a deep learning app on AWS. Stage 3, if I bring up the architecture, looks a little bit like this. So you can see what we've already done in stage 1 there is we created a serverless React app, just basic, nothing to do with deep learning, just to get a feel for how that process works. We moved on to stage 2, the last video in the series, and created this time a deep learning app, but we did that locally using React and Flask, and a bunch of other tools. We're on stage 3 here, so this is all about AWS and specifically infrastructure as code. We're going to use serverless for this. Is one way you can do it. We find it's quite effective to package up all of the tools that are required on AWS to get the deployment up and ready. It doesn't necessarily mean it's complete at the end of this stage, but certainly 85%, 90% of it is done. Lambda comes in here as well, so we'll be creating a Lambda function through serverless. We'll be using S3 for storage, and obviously Python as well. So that's stage 3. It's closely coupled to the next stage, obviously, that follows it. So we may actually just blend these two together, where we're going to, in stage 4, build the actual container images where Docker comes in. We will containerize essentially the deep learning app, push it to AWS Lambda as a container repo. So ECR is involved here on AWS. There's a choice to do it that way. We find it's better to obviously containerize it if you can, because that way you're ring fencing dependencies and liable to get better results, as well as less impact from outside external interfaces. So it's, as the name suggests, containerizing, puts it in a box, if you like, on AWS. Okay, let's get started on that. So that's this architecture. We're going to be following the same steps, basically, that are on the web page. So this is now stage 3. So just so that if you're following along, if you go to blog and look for stage 3 there, hosting deep learning apps in AWS, you'll see that we're on infrastructure as code. Mentioned serverless already. This also involves setting up an EC2 instance, a Linux instance. You have a choice again there, whether you do Windows, MacBook, if you're in a Mac, or something else. We're using Linux here because it's simpler, we find, and the less prone to latency issues in the deployments. So these are the steps for this stage, the sub-steps, if you like. We're going to create an EC2 instance, first of all, connect to EC2 after that. Then we're going to create a project folder on a Linux EC2 machine. It's a virtual machine, so we'll open up Linux from within the AWS console. We'll install Git. That's needed because we're going to pull in that repo that we created in the last stage, and then install Docker, and that'll complete the end of this stage. And I'll talk a bit more about what happens next when we get there. There are the steps. Let's go for AWS console. Log in. You might have this bookmarked already. That's great. Be organized. Sign in. Again, if you haven't signed up, this is the first time using AWS. I'm not going to cover that here. But briefly, you want to probably go for AWS free tier. Just do a Google search for that. There you go. And if you sign up from there, it should take you to the same screen anyway, but if this is your first time, you'll get a number of free credits associated with that. And then usage of some of the tools, most of the tools at least, are up to a certain limit, and then beyond that you would incur minor costs initially. Not always happy with the way cloud or the CSPs or hyperscalers disclose their costs. Sometimes it's a bit intransparent, but by and large, certainly if you're signing up for the first time, you'll get free usage. I'm not on the free tier here, but the actual costs of running this are very small. So for example, this app, I've got a backup app that's been running for about a month. It's run up something like $5-6 on AWS. Okay. So put your details in there. In my case, I've set up multi-factor authentication, so you will need to put your multi-factor code in. You should have an app or on your phone, for example, that will give you a code every 30 seconds. All right. So what we need, first of all, as shown in the web page and the steps that I just put up, is to create an EC2 instance. Okay, so EC2, if you type that, I'm going to zoom in a little bit, see easier, EC2. All right, and then what we want to do, in my case, my homepage I've already got an instance running, so you might have a slightly different homepage if it's the first time. Launch an instance. The button should be there somewhere. If it's the first time, it might be at the top. In my case, it's still further down the sheet. Launch an instance there. All right, and now you get these templates provided. There's a lot of fluff here, really. We don't need all of this. Actually defaults to Linux, which is convenient because we're going to use that. And you'll see here it says free tier eligible. So even though I'm no longer using free tier here, this particular virtual machine is free tier available. So what we would suggest, rather than using this default here, you can see it's T2 micro there, AWS syntax really for all the EC2 instances. It's going to be a bit slow. It's only 1 GB memory, so RAM. That's incredibly low, obviously. So I'm going to use T2 small. The next one up, sorry, not T2, T3 small, which does incur a small cost. You can see the hourly cost there. It's tiny. As I mentioned, something like $5. $5-6 I've incurred over a month running this entire app. That's not just EC2 instances that are involved there. That's ECR as well, S3 buckets and so on. So T3 small, and then we're going to launch instance. First of all, sorry, you want to key pair name. I already got one here, but I'm going to create a new one just for purposes here. So if you go to create new key pair type, type in a name. Generally avoid putting dates with a key pair. It's keys essentially to use your EC2 instance. I'm using a date here just because I've already got one with that name. You'll get what's called a PEM file created from this. Okay, so you want to create that. Just take the defaults for everything else. You see it gets dumped there on your desktop. and we'll need that shortly. So now launch instance, and it should launch. You get a success tick at the top, and that's literally it. So go back to instances here at the top, and you'll see here, here we go. Status check initializing, that's the one I've just created. T3 small. All right, so we can't, well, let's see if we can access it. We should be able to click on it there on the left. And if we go to connect, let's see if it lets us. Okay, you'll get this screen. There's a few ways to connect. You might be familiar with using the AWS CLI command line interface. Go for it. Here, we're just going to use the console itself, so that it's the default EC2 instance connect. And then if you go to connect from here, all things being well, that will open a Linux window. All right, so here we've got our Linux screen. Just zoom in a little bit. And what we want to do first of all here is think of it as a virtual machine as it is. We need to make a little project folder similar to what we did in stage 2 on our local drive. So let's go ahead and do that, and just use the make directory command there. I'm going to call it AWS in line with the instructions we've put on the website. Lambda EL app, make sure no spaces there, dashes are good, underscores less good but better than anything else if you were trying to separate the words. Okay, and then CD into that, and get used to, if you're not familiar with Linux, here up and down arrows on your keyboard really are the most important keys to remember, because they cycle through previous commands, and we'll be using the same commands over and over and over a lot. So up takes me to the previous command I ran. I don't want to run that, but all I want to do is change, and I use the left arrow key, and I make directory to CD. Okay, and what that does is it changes directory. You can see there it has taken me into the subfolder that we've just created. All right, so inside that, we're going to install Git and Docker. In fact, not quite correct. We want to go up a level to install Git. So if you go cd ... we're back where we were at the parent folder. And if you want to if you get lost a little bit with this, you can always do ls, which is list, which tells you the subfolders in the folder that you're in. So as we're going up a level, the subfolder is the one that we created. And then we are going to do a git install, okay, with this command. Now, I'm copying it just so you can see here from the steps on the website. You can just go there, highlight it with your mouse, right-click, copy, go back to the terminal, right-click, paste this plain text. Sometimes, if you're pasting, a right-click is sufficient. It will do it. Sometimes you do that extra step there and confirm that you're pasting it. Just make sure there's no rogue spaces. And this is going to install, as I mentioned, Git for us. There we go. Okay, done. It's all very quick. We're using Linux here. It's as quick as it gets. Linux doesn't have a GUI. It's why it's so fast compared to something like Windows, where obviously everything's much slower. You've got a graphical user interface you're grappling with there, and it's been rendered in the background. Docker is the next step. In fact, the last step in this relatively short stage. And what we want to do there is a number of steps. First of all, we want to go into our subfolder this time, right? So cd, we've already run this command, so you can press the up arrow, pull it back, cd AWS Lambda DL app, and then similar to the last sudo command we put in this time, we put that in to support updates to our machine. All right, that's all right. You can see the message there. There's nothing, no dependencies to deal with. The next command is to install Docker itself. Okay. That'll take a little bit longer to run than the git install marginally, but there you go, it's done already. We then need to start the Docker container with this command. I'm pasting them from the website. You can type them in, it doesn't really matter. Okay, and we're almost there. Just a couple more steps. We've started Docker after installing it, and then we want to run this authentication step really. Now, again, copying from the web page that we've produced for the steps. You can see here at the end, it's got EC2-user. Where does that come from? That is basically the name we've taken as a default for our EC2 instance. Now, if you change that, obviously you will need to update the command, but we didn't change it. No reason to in this case. So just run that as it is. It will run without a message if it's done okay. And then we have to close the whole Linux instance to reflect all of those changes. Just press type exit, it'll log us out. Advised to close the window as well. And back in our connect screen, which should still have open in the background there, just reconnect. And that's it. That's stage 3 complete. We've set up all of those tools that we need for this deployment on AWS. Just going back to our architecture here, serverless actually comes into it really in the next step, but we've set up essentially using, we've installed Git, we've installed Docker, S3 as well will come in the boilerplate template we've got in stage 4. These two stages are very interrelated, as we will see, but we're good to go into the next step. So thanks for listening and stay tuned for the next stage.